In an age when facts are often distorted before they even reach the public, the cost of political misinformation is no longer just national, it's global. The latest eruption came when Donald Trump, in a widely viewed campaign event, praised what he called a big, beautiful bill supposedly passed during his presidency to fix the U.S. border crisis. But a CNN fact-check swiftly dismantled his claims, labeling them wildly, categorically inaccurate. The incident reveals more than just one man's falsehoods. It highlights a growing international crisis, the erosion of truth in democracy. At the heart of the controversy is Trump's assertion that his administration passed sweeping immigration legislation, which he credits for major successes at the U.S.-Mexico border. "We had the best border ever. We had a big, beautiful bill. Everyone loved it," Trump claimed. However, CNN's fact-checkers, supported by former White House legal staff and congressional archives, confirmed that no such bill was ever passed because it never existed. Instead, the Trump administration relied on executive orders and administrative rule changes to shape border policy, many of which were challenged or overturned in court. Analysts point out that while Trump's rhetoric may resonate with a portion of the electorate, it risks cementing a false policy legacy. Moreover, it blurs the lines between legislation and propaganda, making it increasingly difficult for the public, especially undecided voters, to discern fact from fiction in an election year. Why does a U.S. campaign claim matter to the rest of the world? Because the United States still serves as a global reference point for democratic discourse. When misinformation dominates its electoral politics, the ripple effects can weaken international norms, embolden authoritarian regimes, and undercut trust in democratic institutions globally. Countries like Brazil, Hungary, and the Philippines have cited American political language to justify their own crackdowns on press freedom or electoral integrity. Additionally, immigration policy misstatements influence bilateral relations with neighboring nations like Mexico and Guatemala, where diplomatic teams rely on accurate policy interpretations to manage refugee flows, trade logistics, and joint border cooperation. False claims about bills that don't exist complicate this delicate dance and risk triggering unnecessary diplomatic friction. Beyond politics and diplomacy, the deeper concern is societal. Misleading narratives around immigration feed xenophobia, stir social division, and distract from the real crises facing displaced populations. In a year when global migration has surpassed 300 million people driven by climate change, war, and poverty, truth-based policy is not optional. It's essential. Inaccurate claims, especially when uncorrected, can also demobilize the public's ability to hold leaders accountable. If citizens can't trust the information shared by top political figures, how can they meaningfully engage? In the democratic process, disinformation doesn't just corrupt truth, it poisons civic participation. Trump's big, beautiful bill never existed, but the consequences of his false claim are very real. As the 2024 U.S. presidential race heats up and populist rhetoric spreads across continents, fact-checking is no longer a domestic media responsibility, it is a global democratic defense. Watch the full CNN fact-check report and explore what's at stake.
Right now on Capitol Hill, senators are in the so-called vote-a-rama. They're voting on amendments to President Trump's key policy bill of his second term. A final vote is expected later tonight. At least 2 Republicans have indicated that they will oppose the bill. But where do things stack up on what's in the bill versus what we've heard from the Trump administration? Also, there was the House version. There's a lot to sift through, so we want to bring in our senior reporter, Daniel Dale, who joins us now for a fact check. Hi, Daniel. So let's start with what the president has said on Medicaid. How does that compare to what's actually in this bill?
Some of the president's recent comments, Pamela, have been wildly categorically inaccurate. Listen, for example, to something he said last week.
We're cutting $1.7 trillion in this bill, and you're not going to feel any of it. And your Medicaid is left alone. It's left the same. Your Medicare and your Social Security are strengthened. We're not cutting.
Whatever the merits of this legislation, and whatever the merits, and you can certainly defend this legislation as Republicans have been doing, it objectively does not leave Medicaid the same. It is objective fact that this legislation makes major changes and indeed major cuts to Medicaid. So what kinds of changes are we talking about? Well, one of them that has received a lot of discussion is a work requirement, specifically a requirement that many recipients considered able-bodied who do not have young children prove that they are working or in school or in job training or volunteering 80 plus hours a month. That's not the only big change. The legislation would require for the first time certain Medicaid enrollees to pay out of pocket for certain health services. There would be significant changes to the so-called provider tax that rural hospitals warned could force the closure of some of them or require significant cuts in care. It imposes additional administrative burdens on people and states. So again, good or bad, defend it or not defend it, this is big stuff. And how big? Well, the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office says we're talking $930 billion cut in federal support for Medicaid over 10 years. That is the biggest Medicaid cut in history, according to many experts. And that would, of course, impact real people. This nonpartisan CBO estimates that we're talking about 11.8 million additional uninsured people in 2034 as a result of this legislation. Not all of it as a result of people losing Medicaid, but many of that 11.8 million would be people now on Medicaid who wouldn't be.
And Daniel, what about the president's promise of no tax on Social Security benefits?
Yeah, so Wolf, the president keeps talking and posting on social media as if this legislation would fulfill his major campaign promise to completely eliminate tax on Social Security. It simply would not. It does not eliminate tax on Social Security. Many seniors would still be paying it. Now, what the legislation does do is provide an additional tax deduction for seniors. It would be a $4,000 additional deduction in the House version, $6,000 additional deduction in the Senate version. That is, of course, something. It is certainly a step toward the president's campaign promise, but no, it does not completely satisfy that no tax on Social Security pledge.
What about what the president said during the campaign, the no taxes on tips, no taxes on overtime? And the president has said that passing this bill could also result in a historic tax hike for some. What do we know there?
Yeah, so he keeps using this 68% figure. I want you to listen to something else he said last week.
Well, look, it's a great bill. It's a massive tax cut. If it's not approved, your taxes will go up by 68%. Think of that, 68, a record, the highest in the history. The Democrats won't approve it only because politically it's so good for the Republicans. The Democrats aren't approving it. But think of what they're not approving. They're not approving border security. We've done a great job at the border, but we have to add some wall. We have to do various things. We have no money for that.
This 68% figure is fiction, and it is such fiction that the White House wouldn't even defend it on condition of anonymity when I asked for comment. No defense whatsoever. There is no credible estimate that not passing this legislation would produce a 68% tax hike. Now, the nonpartisan think tank, the Tax Policy Center, did say that there would be an average tax hike of about 7.5% if this bill didn't pass as a result of certain provisions from the 2017 Trump tax law being allowed to expire. And they also said that about 64% of households would face some sort of tax increase if the bill didn't pass. But again, a 64% of households getting some tax increase is not synonymous, guys, with a 68% or even 64% tax hike. It's just not the same thing.
Our excellent fact checker, Daniel Dale, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Congress is on the clock right now. Senators have begun debate on President Trump's spending and tax cut bill, the cornerstone of his second-term agenda.
Right now, senators are in what's called a vote-a-rama. This is a marathon series of votes on possible changes, and it's all part of the deal-making and the arm-twisting to win passage later today. And with 2 Republicans expected to vote no, the president will be leaning on his slim majority. We are, of course, following all of the developments with CNN senior White House correspondent Kristen Holmes and Arlette Saenz on Capitol Hill. Arlette, voting is now underway. Where do things stand right now?
Well, Pamela, senators have been voting for about 90 minutes in this marathon voting session. It's known as vote-a-rama and allows senators to introduce amendments to President Trump's agenda bill up here on Capitol Hill. Now, Democrats are expected to introduce quite a few amendments that could be potentially on politically tough issues for Republicans, but there are also expected to be a number of Republican amendments in order to try to win over some Republicans Republicans who might be wavering on this bill. Now, one of those amendments is going to come from Senator Rick Scott of Florida. He has proposed reducing the federal payments to states that had expanded Medicaid under President Obama. There's also Senator Susan Collins, who's expected to introduce an amendment relating to a rural hospital fund. A lot of people will also be paying attention to Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska. Senate leadership had initially included two provisions that would have benefited Alaska and Hawaii in the bill over the weekend, but then the Senate parliamentarian ruled that those provisions could not be included. So it's a big question of whether, without those provisions, if she would be a yes on this bill. Now, Senate Republicans can only afford to lose 3 GOP votes on this bill. Over the weekend, 2 Republican senators voted against a procedural hurdle. That was Senator Rand Paul and Senator Tom Tillis, who very quickly then announced that he would not be seeking re-election. Now, earlier today, Senate Majority Leader John Thune was asked whether he is going to have the votes to get this bill across the finish line, and he said, we'll know soon enough. Now, we're just 90 minutes into this vote-a-rama. It's expected to extend for many more hours. No one has predicted quite yet if it would end today or possibly the wee hours of the morning, but there's a lot more work for the Senate to do, and then any changes that were made to the bill here in the Senate would still need to make its way over to the House, where it could also face a complicated future if they're hoping to reach that potential July 4th deadline that the president had talked about.
All right, stand by. I want to go to CNN senior White House correspondent Kristen Holmes right now. Kristen, how involved is the Trump administration in this morning's debate that's ongoing in the Senate?
Well, they couldn't be more involved. We know in the walk-up to leading up to this moment that there was really a full-court press here at the White House. You had aides, advisors, allies of President Trump's meeting with senators one-on-one. You had President Trump himself calling various senators. As you were mentioning, this is the cornerstone of his second term, but it's also his legacy. He believes, and his team believes, that his entire legacy is wrapped up in this bill, and they must get it to pass. And if you're wondering how closely Donald Trump is watching this, this is what he posted on social media. He said, "For all cost-cutting Republicans, of which I am one, remember you still have to get reelected. Don't go too crazy. We will make it all up times 10 with growth more than ever before." Clearly here signaling two things. One, which we already know because we've heard from President Trump, that if you are willing to go against this bill in too extreme of a way, that he is willing to talk about your reelection and potentially primarying you. But also the thing about President Trump is that he is always thinking about what plays well with voters. And remember, we've seen this now for several cycles. So he's trying to say if you go too far, you won't be reelected. But there's twofold of that, because he's obviously willing to come out against any Republicans that come out against his bill. And one thing to keep in mind is, because he is so invested in this passing, he is willing to strong arm. He is willing to talk about primaries, and so is his team. They have been, as I said, full court press on this. They want to get it done. They don't think it's moving fast enough, but they understand that there is a process.
All right, Kristen Holmes, Arlette Saenz, thank you both.